It's amazing how many of my colleague professionals have physical issues resulting from repetitive use, either carpal tunnel or neck issues or back issues, mostly related to playing an instrument in one particular position for an ungodly number of hours, day after day, including all the time when they were training and learning how to become professionals. And the pressures of the competitive business mean that just because you're injured, you can't really stop working. You can't turn down work, or it could really negatively affect your career. So one of the things I wanted to maybe start with is, can you talk a little bit about how not to get injured in normal life and with working out? Are there things that we can do to be conscious of to help us not get injured?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I would start by saying, as humans, you're going to have some aches and pains come up in life. So you want to go into life expecting, that it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to have these things to deal with, especially as we get older too. But that being said, there's a lot you can think about how to prevent injuries and how to minimize, those risks.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, the podcast where we dive into topics that matter the most to you. I'm your host, Tom Rizzo, and today we're shining a spotlight on a very important aspect of all of our lives, physical well-being. Joining us today is Dr. Krissy Gullen, a doctor of physical therapy who works at Evergreen Physical Therapy in Pasadena. Krissy brings a wealth of knowledge about the physical demands placed on all professionals and how to manage and prevent common injuries. This episode is packed with insights that can help you stay in peak physical condition. So let's get started. Welcome, Krissy. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here and just get to have a conversation all about, the body, about health, all the things that I've been passionate about for many years. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
It's amazing how many of my colleague professionals have physical issues resulting from repetitive use, either carpal tunnel or neck issues or back issues, mostly related to playing an instrument in one particular position for an ungodly number of hours, day after day, including all the time when they were training and learning how to become professionals. And the pressures of the competitive business mean that just because you're injured, you can't really stop working. You can't turn down work, or it could really negatively affect your career. So one of the things I wanted to maybe start with is, can you talk a little bit about how not to get injured in normal life and with working out? Are there things that we can do to be conscious of to help us not get injured?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I would start by saying, as humans, you're going to have some aches and pains come up in life. So you want to go into life expecting, that it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to have these things to deal with, especially as we get older too. But that being said, there's a lot you can think about how to prevent injuries and how to minimize, those risks. So I like to think about like having a foundation of health and wellness so that your body is more prepared for what you're going to do day to day. So like, let's say you typically walk a half mile per day, and then all of a sudden you start walking 5 miles a day. It's this concept of like doing too much too soon. Or if we put that in the perspective of like a musician, let's say you're practicing 1 hour a day, and all of a sudden you have a show coming up and you start rehearsing 3-4 hours a day, then that overload is going to basically be what's contributing to a risk of injury. So what you want to do is you want to set up a foundation of health and wellness so that basically you are eating well, you're sleeping well, you're having good hydration, all of those basics, you have that foundation. And then from there, you can build up, you can think about, what are my goals? Like, what do I want to be able to do day to day? Do I want to be able to play for 3, 4 hours a day? Well, you can't start there. You have to start with less and kind of build and build and build up to it versus going from 0 to 100. So I was also going to mention that there are different kinds of damage, or injury. There would be like an acute injury. So that might be maybe you trip and fall, or you bump your elbow on something, or a car accident. That's like an acute injury where there's a mechanism, there's some impact, there's a direct cause to the injury. And so with that, sometimes we can avoid it, sometimes we can't. Another way that we might get injured would be like chronic overuse. So I kind of alluded to that earlier, like let's say you're just playing and playing and playing, and you're not taking the time to give that proper attention to the body. Let's say you're playing piano all the time, and you're really not taking care of the wrists and the hands and giving the shoulders and the neck any TLC, then that may lead to some overuse injuries just because you're always asking a lot from those forearm muscles. And then another category would be, like I said, just doing too much too soon. You're doing too much volume. So you want to take into account, what are my goals and how do I gradually lead up to that?
Well, that's really good advice. In our world as musicians, it's really not in our training to say it's okay to take a rest or it's okay to ramp up to this. The pressures, especially if there is, let's say, a performance goal, if there's a concert at a certain time and you're learning a particular piece and there is going to be competitive pressures at the concert where there's going to be other people either playing the same instrument or people playing with you. The last thing anybody ever thinks about in the preparation for that is, I'd better be careful so I don't hurt myself. I think everybody is always focused on, I got to keep cranking here so that I'm in absolute top form when this thing, when the concert is here, or the audition, or even worse, if it's an audition. So there is there's a cultural issue here, I think, in terms of the way musicians are trained, that this is not particularly baked into the culture. And analogously to what we do with helping people with money, it's not really baked into a musician's training to think about what you're going to do with your money and how you're going to build wealth. It's all focused on keep practicing, keep getting better, keep making sure that you are really well positioned to be able to perform. So I guess this is a challenge to maybe a change in the cultural way people think about what is it that I'm doing when I get up in the daytime and I'm going to spend X number of hours on my instrument. I love what you said is this has got to be a ramp up, that you've got to have a multi-week or multi-month timeline on this, that if I'm going to get to this spot over here and I'm down here, I better have a proper ramp to this, or else bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think having those ramps, it can be really helpful. And then even like thinking about your year or your season, or if there's certain patterns of work that you have, thinking about, if you can program out your year and your activities a little bit, like, for example, like elite athletes, if they know they have a competition coming up, they are going to gradually, many months beforehand, start training and start building up. And then once they get really close to that competition, they're actually going to ramp down a little bit, so their body has time to recover and rest. That way, when they get to the competition, they aren't already burned out. They actually have some more energy in the tank, but they have that training to back it up when they get there.
That's difficult for musicians to get that mindset, but I can see why that is, that's very important, especially for long-term health. I mean, all of our colleagues have seen people get injured and have to stop playing either permanently or for some extended period of time. And you always wonder, could a different program of preparation prevented that injury? Do you see this also in, let's talk about weight training and Pilates and working out and that kind of thing. I assume does this same thing applies to that regime. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Totally correct. There's a lot of people that they have this great intention to start working out. They want to get healthy. Even like starting January, they have these New Year's goals. And so there's that great, intention behind it. But sometimes if they do too much too soon, they will, have a setback and get injured. Or there's also the aspect where they might do too much and they realize that they can't be consistent with that amount of training or that amount of strenuous training, and they kind of fall off the wagon. So it's important to, have in mind that you're going to be ramping up. And then also you want to figure out, a program that you can be consistent with and that you can keep going versus, this up and down sort of progression.
I've seen it with guys, as a guy myself, the issues of, I don't know if it's macho-ness or testosterone or whatever that makes me think that pushing harder is always better. And how do you counsel people who have this disease? And I definitely have it. I definitely have problems with this. How do you help people change that mindset?
So that's one of the common misconceptions, is that more is better, or that you always have to push yourself to the maximum. And that's not really the case. A lot of people think if I'm not totally wiped out, if I'm not totally sore the next day, I did something wrong, or I didn't do enough, or I'm not going to be building strength. But actually soreness, it comes from novel movement to the body. If you do something that's new that you're not used to and you're using different movement patterns, you're recruiting a different amount of muscle fibers, the body will respond to that with soreness. So let's say you lift, you're doing some bicep curls and you're lifting heavy weights. The biceps are going to have little micro tears happening in that tissue, which is normal. And then from there, the body's going to be stimulated to compensate and build back stronger along those muscles. So soreness isn't always, the goal, but it might happen if you're doing something that's new or you're pushing the muscles a little bit harder. Another thing to keep in mind is that, when you're sore, it is all your body can handle that soreness better if you've had a good foundation of nutrition, of hydration, of sleep. So if you're in a better state overall with your healthy lifestyle, you're going to be able to recover from soreness and kind of do these harder workouts with less of those after effects as well. So rather than always shooting for, getting as sore as possible, we really want to be able to sustain our workouts. Being sore, that may happen here and there, but that doesn't need to be the goal. Push, push, push until I'm super sore. You want to have the ability to manage your workouts well without extreme soreness, and kind of get enough sleep and recover and build forward that way. Another common misconception is that you need to confuse your muscles and you need to basically change up your workouts all the time and do new variations of movements and exercises here and there. And that's not true either. You're going to get the most benefit if you can gradually build up and become an expert in the movements that you're doing, and you can progressively overload those muscles. That's how you build strength. When it comes to confusing your muscles, I appreciate the idea of variety for the sake of, enjoyment, and maybe you're an athlete and you want to have the ability to kind of have lots of movement options and a variety of ways that you're moving. But for the most part, you want to have a program where you can repeat the same movements over and over, get better and better at them gradually, versus striving for just confusion and overload and soreness.
I would imagine that's a commonly held misconception. I think that's before I met you. I think that's the way I thought it worked, that was the optimum thing, is don't do the same thing all the time, because I think the mantra was, well, your muscles have gotten used to it and it's not doing them any good. So that's very interesting to have you say that that's actually not the way things work. Can you speak a little bit about the different objectives one might have during workouts, in terms of looking to build muscle mass versus endurance, or versus whatever the other objectives are? I mean, what are the different objectives that people have when they would either come to you as a trainer or to have you help them improve their health?
Yeah, so some of the common objectives would be like weight loss. Some people want help with their mobility. They feel like they're not flexible. Sometimes people have balance issues. They want to incorporate some ways to improve their balance and not be a risk of falling later on in life. Building up strength and building up endurance. Sometimes there's people who let's say they're training for a specific competition, or they want to train for a marathon or something like that, and they want to be kind of well prepared for that. Those would be all kind of different categories within the realm I see. And there's some people who come with an existing injury or history of injuries, and some who are feeling good and they just want to maintain that general level of fitness and wellness, and prevent, any injuries in the future.
I think I know of a lot of people that are kind of do-it-yourselfers in this area, where they don't seek out a professional like yourself to help guide them. Do you have advice for do-it-yourselfers besides find a professional to help them? Do you have other advice on how the do-it-yourselfer can prevent injury and help them increase their general overall health?
So for do-it-yourselfers, I would say some of the general guidelines would be, you want to start with 150 minutes of moderate level exercise per week, or you could do 75 minutes of intensive strenuous exercise per week. So that could be over the week. You don't have to do, in fact, I would not recommend doing it all, 1 or 2 days at the beginning of the week. It's best to have 1 to 2 days in between sessions, so that way you can recover. So in terms of moderate level exercise, which would be a good place to start, you don't want your heart rate to be going at its maximum. So in order to know what is my maximum heart rate, how you could calculate that would be 220 minus your age. That'll give you your maximum heart rate. So you want to be in about 50 to 70% of that number to be exercising at a moderate level. So for some people, that might be a brisk walk, that might be jogging, that might be, doing sets of some weightlifting, strength training. There's a lot of options. That might be swimming, but you want to kind of start with that intensity. And then from there, you can kind of gradually build. If you want to try out the higher intensity intervals, you're going to be doing shorter duration. So I wouldn't recommend someone, saying, okay, I'm going to do sprints for 30 minutes. You've got to kind of taper it down if you're doing higher intensity. And like I said, you want to space out the workouts. So a good rule of thumb is to start with 2 or 3 days a week. And then if you want to increase to maybe 3 or 4 days, that would be appropriate, and have those rest days in between. On those rest days, you don't have to be, couch potato. You could definitely do some stretching. You could definitely do some easy walking, something that's not getting your heart rate up super high and not straining your muscles, and you feel like it's a good kind of recovery type of movement. Also for the DIYers, I think it's important to think about the whole body. So instead of thinking about doing isolated movements, or thinking about a certain aesthetic that you want. And some people think, oh, I want abs, or I want big arms. And it doesn't always work that way. Like, you can't decide where you want to lose weight. If you're using a certain area a lot, you may tone up those muscles. They might become more visible, but you can't really dictate to your body, oh, I want to lose weight here, or I want to look this way. It comes from those movement patterns over time. So I would think about the different areas of the body. So if you're working on the lower body, you want to be able to do double leg exercises where you're standing on two legs. So that would be like a squat, like a deadlift motion. And then doing some single leg exercises would be like a lunge motion, single leg deadlift where you're standing on one foot and then moving from there. Because we're exercising to be able to live well and have health throughout our lives. So when you think about that, going throughout your day, we're on one foot some of the time. We're walking, we're going up steps. Sometimes we bend down on two legs, squat down and pick something up. So you want to think of those natural human movement patterns as the guide for what you're doing. So that's kind of the general guide. In terms of legs, you want to do squats and deadlifts, some single leg exercises. For the upper body, some of the natural movements would be like a pulling motion where you're using the elbows coming back, pulling, or a pushing movement also would be another main pattern. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can use dumbbells, free weights, TRX. You could start with bands. For pushing, same thing. You could use cables, bands. You could do push-ups on the countertop. But if you're doing both of those, that's going to help you balance out the muscles in the front of the body and in the back of the shoulders and upper back. Same thing as well. You want to do two arm movements and you want to do some one arm movements as well. Because daily life, we're not always moving the arms symmetrically. You want to have one arm being able to move on its own as well. And then when it comes to core exercises, there's a little bit of, I would say, not controversy, but some people will say, oh, you don't need to do any core exercises. All of the weightlifting that you're doing with free weights will incorporate your core. When you're standing and balancing, the core is going to be stabilizing you. And then there's another camp that say, oh, yes, you really do need to do focused core exercises, and that's going to really help protect your back, protect your spine, and just develop your stability through the core. So I fall a little bit more on the side that core exercises are helpful. In terms of Pilates, that's one of the main focuses. And I've seen a lot of success with people incorporating some core exercises within their full regimen, their full routine. So I think when it comes to DIY, keeping those big compound movements in mind, those functional movements helps. Spacing out your workouts with rests. And then if you need a guide, an expert, working with a trainer or a physical therapist to kind of get you started at least and make sure you're doing the movement safely and you understand how to progress. In terms of progression, I will tell people to think of like a 5% increase each week as long as they are feeling able. So, some people will say, oh, I lifted 20 pounds last week. I'm gonna go up to 60 pounds this week. So you don't want to do too much too soon, right? So you want to allow your body to progressively build, and that's going to help with injury prevention as well.
You mentioned Pilates towards the end of what you were just saying. Can you speak a little bit more about those techniques and how you incorporate those into helping people get healthy?
Yeah, when it comes to Pilates, it is a specialized type of movement. You can do mat Pilates, which is on a mat on the floor. There's also a piece of equipment called a reformer. There's a couple other pieces of equipment that you can use as well, but they follow the same principles. So the principles would be like concentration, flow, precision in your movement. You do focus a lot on the way that you're using your core, and the way that you're coordinating the limbs as you're moving. So I think it's a good way for people to find a mind-body connection where they're learning some coordination within their body. It's also nice because you're able to do it in a non-weight bearing position or partial weight bearing, meaning you're laying down or you're on your knees, hands and knees, versus always standing up. So I've had people where maybe they just had a surgery, or maybe they are worried about balance, and they want to be able to start exercising in a safe way. It's a good way to get started. They can learn how to feel their quads and feel their parascapular muscles and their rotator cuff without feeling overwhelmed with managing a lot of free weights and shifting weight back and forth right when they're starting. So it is a resistance type exercise because there are springs on the reformer if you're using that. So you can start to build some strength. But I would say for the most part, I recommend people doing some weight training, standing strength training with weights as well, because that is the most functional way to strength train. You know, I love Pilates because I'm a dancer, and it incorporates a lot of movements where you get to work on that flow and that kind of ease and grace with your movement. But I don't only do Pilates because I know I might be missing out on some of that, the benefits of weight bearing, holding weights, and getting some of that bone density promotion with that too.
So if someone was going to incorporate Pilates and some weight training into creating a program, what would the ratio be of how much time you'd spend on the Pilates machines and versus free weights or other kinds of exercise?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say I would still want them to do about 2 to 3 days of the strength training with free weights, because you just don't want to miss out on the benefits of that. Then if they want to add on top, if they want to add in some Pilates, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, that could even fit in on one of your rest days. Like let's say you're lifting heavier 2 or 3 days a week. Maybe on those off days, you fill in some Pilates, and it's a way to get movement. You're getting that blood flow. There's a lot of, full range of motion where you're stretching during Pilates, but you're not going to be overusing those muscles that are already sore. Some people, they will, try to really focus on heavy springs on the reformer. And that's fine. I think for me, you might miss out on being able to lift as heavy on those other days with the free weights if you're pushing yourself too much on those off days as well. So I like that mix of, the weight training, and then in between, you're still moving, you're doing some stretching, range of motion, but there's a lower intensity to it. It's low impact. It feels good. It's enjoyable, and it doesn't have to be as strenuous as the other days.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And what role does cardio play in this in terms of how you need to concentrate on building your cardio capabilities?
Yeah, Yeah, when it comes to cardio, we want to be definitely incorporating some cardio work that's very healthy for the heart. And I would go back to kind of what I was talking about earlier about thinking about how fast is the heart rate? You know, how intense are you working? When you are lifting weights, your heart rate is going to go up. You are going to be challenging your cardiac, you're going to have increased demand from the heart. But it's going to be a little bit less than, let's say, doing sprints, things like that. So I would look at that maximum heart rate number, so the 220 minus your age. You want to go into 80 to 90% of that number. That's going to be a high enough intensity where you're really going to challenge the heart and being able to develop more capacity in the heart. And I would do that in shorter intervals. So that may be 1 to 2 minutes of a sprint where your heart rate is up at that 80 to 90% level, and then rest. So if you ever heard of like high intensity interval training, you do that short sprint, that short duration, and then you're kind of taking a rest, backing off. So it might be 45 seconds to a minute, and then a rest for 30 seconds or so. Back and forth, back and forth. And then you want to, over the week, get about 10 to 20 minutes of that high intensity demand from the heart. So that is going to be enough in terms of that 80 to 90%. But then you don't want to just be doing, like I said, couch potato the rest of the day or the rest of the week. You also want to have some of that moderate level heart rate, 50 to 70%. And you may accomplish that through walking, through swimming, through your strength training as well. You know, let's say you're doing sets of squats, sets of deadlifts, sets of overhead press. Your heart rate is most likely going to be in that range during those exercises. So at that point, you just need to add in those sprints, those high intensity intervals to kind of make sure you're covering your bases in terms of cardiovascular fitness.
How do you know what the heart rate is? Do you wear a monitor, or how do you know what that number is that your heart's pumping at?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the moderate level, if you can talk, you know you're in that moderate level. So like, let's say you're walking up a hill and you're having a conversation with someone talking on the phone, you know that you're not too high if you're able to carry on a conversation. So we call that like the talk test. If you're able to talk normally without gasping for air, you know that you're not too high, you're kind of in that moderate level while you're exercising. And then as for the high level, you may have to, you can take your pulse rate with your fingers here, you know, see how many beats you're feeling in 15 seconds, and then multiply that by 4 for a minute and see what you're at there. Or they have lots of Apple Watches and monitors these days, rings and things like that you can track. I have a client who comes and she has an Apple Watch, and then she walks on a treadmill and she'll kind of check to see what her heart rate is, and we can keep track of that during the session. So there's a lot of options there, but you know, if you don't have the watch, you can just go old fashioned and just kind of measure your pulse here.
Are those watches and rings, are they fairly accurate?
They are, yeah, they are pretty accurate. I've found that the watches can sometimes be a little bit delayed, like you'll see that loading screen, but your heart rate, you're already recovering. Let's say you do a sprint, then you stop and you're gonna say, let's see what the heart rate is. You might just get a loading screen, and then your heart rate's already coming down, you know, so you might not get that instantaneous number. But if you look back at the chart later on, you know, it'll give you a graph. You might see, oh, okay, yeah, that must have been when I was at my peak sprint, and then I started recovering.
I see. Yeah. Well, I see most of people who are my kids' age, they all have Apple Watches, and they're all tracking their health and those things. And I've just always been interested in how accurate the data collection is. But you seem to think it's pretty accurate from those devices.
Yeah, I think it is pretty accurate. I think it's helpful.
Yeah.
Some of them show like your oxygenation, your heart rate, things like that. So I think it's a good tool.
Excellent. Excellent. You know, in some of the conversations we've had leading up to this interview, you've talked a little bit about other lifestyle factors, like getting your blood sugar balance, things you can do to keep your blood sugar in balance. You talked about morning and evening walks, just even short ones, having benefit. Can you talk a little bit about your ideas on that end of things for everyone's health?
Yeah, that's a great topic. That's one of my favorite topics because I think it's so underrated. I think a lot of times we hear about diet and exercise, but there are a lot of other factors that are contributing to our health. Um, so for one, I think about the kind of hot topic of like inflammation. How do we control inflammation? Um, Inflammation is basically, it's a normal process in the body. But if we are overreacting to foods or we're having junk foods and things like that, it's going to promote more inflammation in the body, and that may overload our systems. So we really want inflammation to just be a short-term mechanism where your body is getting rid of any waste products and bringing in more oxygen, and just restoring those tissues. We don't want to have a lot of ongoing kind of cyclical inflammation all the time. So some of the ways you might control inflammation would be looking at your sugar intake. So eating a lot of processed sugars will drive your inflammation up in your body. Also alcohol, that can contribute, and caffeine. Too much caffeine is going to contribute to more of that inflammation as well. And then another one would be like inflammatory oils, which would be like canola oils. I've heard recently more of a push for like using coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil in your cooking. And the reason for that is because when you heat up the vegetable oils like canola oil, palm oil, things like that, they are unstable in the body. They're basically the molecules are going to cause damage within the body.
Oh.
So they're like free radicals that are kind of going all over the place, causing inflammation, versus the other oils, they're more stable. So they're not going to have these free radicals popping off in the body and causing damage. So I think just taking an overview of your diet and cutting out those inflammatory oils as much as you can. And there's a lot of products out there now that you can read on the package, on the nutrition label, what it's made with. And there's a lot of alternatives these days, commonly like chips and crackers are things that would have those inflammatory oils. But these days, you can find alternatives that use the healthier oil, so you don't have to totally cut out these favorite snacks and things like that. So I think just taking a look at those nutrition labels and just understanding what chemicals are in them can be a really big promoter of health. The other thing when it comes to diet is having enough protein in your diet. So protein is very important, not only for muscle recovery. When you're working out, you need to be giving that nutrition to the muscles so you can build stronger. But if you aren't having enough protein in your day, you're going to start to crave more sugars, crave more carbohydrates and things like that. So a good rule of thumb is to be eating about 100 grams of protein throughout the day. So if you think about, let's say, breakfast, you may have 20 to 30 grams of protein, and same thing, lunch and dinner, that's getting you around 90 to 100 grams in the day. So that's kind of some main concepts for diet. And then you also want to make sure you're sleeping well. So you want to have 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. It is helpful as well before you go to sleep to have like a nighttime routine. So you're basically telling your body that you are winding down for the night to have a more deep and restful night of sleep. Some of the things that come in conflict with sleep would be looking at screens, having a lot of that bright blue light in our eyes throughout the day. They do sell some glasses now. It's kind of dorky to some people, but they have these glasses where you can block out the blue light.
Yeah.
If you're going to be needing to be on the computer or phone or watching TV at night, you can keep doing those things and just kind of help to block out some of that blue light. That way you're able to sleep better at night. And then speaking about light, throughout the day, outside from the sun, you're going to get different wavelengths of the light. So first thing in the morning, you're going to be exposed to different wavelengths as compared to later in the afternoon or the evening. So it's ideal if you can get out first thing in the morning for about 10 to 20 minutes and just expose your eyes to those light rays. That way it's telling your brain to start getting that melatonin ready, that hormone that's going to help with sleep later that night. It's going to promote that later on in the night. And I also love walks just for the blood sugar balance. So as you're walking, your body is using some energy and using up any glucose and any sugar that you've had from breakfast or from dinner, and it's putting it to good use versus letting it kind of run wild in the body and so forth.
Well, one of the things I like about that instruction is that we don't have to go on a 10-mile walk to get some benefit. You can go on a relatively short 10 or 15-minute walk. And I think, I don't know how everybody else is, but I tend to think, well, 10 minutes not going to do anything, so I might as well not do it if I don't have an hour to go out. And what I'm hearing you saying, just a short amount of time, early morning with the slanted rays of the sun, and same thing at night, can bring huge benefits. And it really doesn't take, you don't have to carve out an enormous amount of time to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's very true. So a lot of these habits, they're not a huge commitment. You can make an impact with just short exercises or just simple habits. You can kind of stack them or layer them. Like some people in their nighttime routine, they'll go for a walk, and then when they come back in, they will take a shower, they'll wind down, they'll kind of have a routine where you're stacking up these habits. That way it's not overwhelming. It's not adding to your to-do list. I've got to do this and it's going to take another hour, and then this, and then it's too much. You can really get a lot of benefit from just short, even enjoyable habits. That's what I love about, going outside, is it doesn't have to be, like you said, a long hike. You're just getting a brief amount of sunshine, and we live in Southern California for the most part, or I do. So it's most of the time we have good weather, it's a nice way to start the day. Seeing the trees and the greenery, it's stress reducing. So it's just a nice break, and lots of benefits as well.
Yeah, while you're saying that, I was thinking about a year or so ago, you had given me a set of mobility exercises to do. And these were, I don't know, 6 or 7 exercises, and they took about, 10, 12, 13 minutes to do. And when I first started doing them, I was like, what's 10 minutes going to do in terms of making me, it just didn't seem logical to me that there could be any benefit. And then after doing these things, after about 3 or 4 days, I was getting immediate relief from some aches and pains and just, muscle movement, that kind of thing. And it was shocking to me that I could spend 10 minutes and really feel a real benefit without having to kill myself or be exhausted or that kind of thing. And at least this is, I don't know if it's just bad thinking on my part, that unless I'm really exerting the hell out of myself, I'm not doing myself any good. And that's really not true if these things are designed properly.
Yeah, that's such a good point. A lot of times it doesn't take a long time, and just things that seem simple or seem basic, they are in line with the way that our bodies are designed and the way that we're going to be able to maintain health and wellness and longevity. I think a good analogy is like brushing our teeth, right? So you do that twice a day, and it doesn't take more than a couple of minutes, but because you're doing it consistently, it's going to prevent you from hopefully, having this need for like a dental surgery or other interventions on your teeth later on. Versus if you say, oh, what effect is brushing my teeth going to have? Well, then later down the road, you may end up with cavities and this and that, and that's going to be more costly. It's going to be a longer procedure. You might have to undergo, more painful, stressful, versus just taking that time to daily, give yourself what it needs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about the age ranges of patients that you help, or people that you help.
Yeah, so at Evergreen, we see people from infancy all the way up through, I think my oldest person is in their 80s. Right now, I don't do pediatric physical therapy, but my youngest patient is probably 9 years old. And then my oldest, like I said, in their 80s. So there is a wide range. And with that, they have different needs, different goals. With the younger population, it's a little bit more of athletics and sports, or maybe an acute injury that we help them solve and then hopefully get back to, their hobby or their sport. I also have a handful of adolescents who have scoliosis. So we might be working on the spine, on strengthening and stretching, helping to optimize their posture and things like that. And then, all the way up through middle age and older age, we work on, anything from arthritis to sprains and strains. We have people who come in because they are having trouble with walking, with balance, with falls. And we take the time to help them, be safe and understand how they can exercise and optimize their mobility as they get older.
Well, Krissy, this is so great, this information, because it absolutely applies to every single one of us in terms of, I'm sure almost everyone feels like they could be doing better. And by incorporating some of the things that you're talking about. So I really appreciate you having taken the time today to talk to us. And we encourage people to reach out to either Krissy herself or any other professional, doctor of physical therapy in this area. It's time and money well spent if you have a good person, and Krissy's definitely one of those, to guide you and to be able to show you how not to do too much or not to do too little. And I think I wish we grew up with this in our education system, understanding how our bodies worked and what it is that we need to do. But I highly encourage everybody listening to consider consulting with a physical therapist, and I know that it'll help your life be much more enjoyable. So thanks, Krissy. We appreciate you being here. And once again, Dr. Krissy Gullen, a doctor of physical therapy who works at Evergreen Physical Therapy in Pasadena. And for all of you watching, thank you for taking the time to listen here. This podcast will be posted on our website, so you can view it as many times as you want. And we have some great guests coming up in the future here, so please stay tuned to the future things. And with that, I think I'll sign off. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. So thank you. Thanks, Krissy.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Let's Talk. A big thank you to Dr. Krissy Gullen for sharing her expertise as a doctor of physical therapy with us. Stay tuned for more discussions aimed at helping you thrive in your career. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your fellow freelancers. Thanks again for watching.